In March 2026, the American federal authorities released a 74-year-old man from prison after 10 years of incarceration. He didn't kill, he didn't rob banks, and he didn't sell weapons. He was imprisoned because he refused to answer the question of where 500 gold coins from a sunken ship worth tens of millions of dollars were located. Each day of imprisonment cost him a fine of $1,000. His health was deteriorating, lawyers kept changing, and he remained silent. The coins were never found. Hello, my friend, you're on the Kurtop channel. Today you'll learn about farmers from Nebraska who started finding huge stone spirals in their fields. And for 40 years, not a single scientist could explain where they came from. About an entire medieval city that sank underwater, along with its streets and cemetery, and still lies there to this day. I'll tell you about a cave in the Peruvian mountains. After what was seen there, the military closed off access. Watch the video until the end so you don't miss anything. Did they find D'Artagnan's remains? The real D'Artagnan's name was Charles de Batz de Castelmore, and he really existed. He served in the King's Musketeers under Louis XIV. He was close to the king and died in 1673 during the siege of Maastricht in the Netherlands. According to historical sources, he was killed right on the battlefield. His body was buried somewhere in the city, but no one recorded exactly where, or the records simply did not survive. For almost 400 years, hardly anyone knew anything about his grave. And then during restoration work in one of the old churches in Maastricht, workers came across a skeleton. In the chest area, fragments of a musket ball were found. A French coin was lying next to the body, and the age of the burial, by all indications, matches the date of D'Artagnan's death. Now, DNA samples have been sent for analysis, and there is no official confirmation yet. Science is in no hurry to make bold statements without definitive proof. But researchers say there are too many coincidences to consider this an accident. Think about this. Alexandre Dumas wrote his Musketeers in 1944. That was 170 years after the real person's death. The novel became one of the most widely read in the world. Billions of people know the name D'Artagnan from movies, TV series, and plays, and yet no one knew where his remains were until last year. If you've come across a similar story, a random discovery that turned out to be a huge breakthrough, write about it in the comments. It would be interesting to make a full video about such stories. Rolex watch at the bottom of the ocean. Last summer, Australian surfer Matt Cadihi was diving off the coast of Noosa, looking for something interesting on the ocean floor. Usually you find lost fins, snorkeling masks, and other beach trash there. But this time, there was a watch lying on the bottom, a Rolex Submariner, one of the most iconic models of the Swiss brand, and it costs about $20,000. And what's most interesting is that it was still working. It had been lying on the ocean floor. It had been lying on the ocean floor for several years and was still running. On the back cover, Matt found an engraving, presented in 1971. Most people in his place would have just sold the find, but Matt started looking for the owner through social media, and he found them pretty quickly. A man named Rick got in touch himself and said that his father had given him this watch more than 50 years ago for winning a sailing race. Rick never parted with the gift his whole life until he lost it in the ocean in 2019, a few years ago. Then a random diver found the watch and it was returned to its owner in working condition. The phrase "as reliable as a Swiss watch" took on a whole new meaning. This was preserved for 20 million years. In the mid-19th century, farmers in Sioux County, Nebraska, began to notice strange things right in their fields. Stone spirals were sticking out of the ground, twisted perfectly like a corkscrew, as thick as a human arm, and some taller than a person. No one understood what they were or where they came from, and pretty quickly people started calling them devil's corkscrews because there just wasn't any reasonable explanation. In 1991, a scientist finally came to see them, the geologist Erwin Barber. He studied the samples and found that the spirals were fossils, sand-filled tubes with fibrous walls that were clearly of biological origin. But he couldn't figure out exactly what they were. The first theory was that they were giant freshwater sponges. This seemed logical right up until geologists noticed that the rock surrounding the corkscrews didn't resemble the bottom of an ancient lake at all. It looks more like a dry steppe. Barber switched to the theory that they were fossilized plants. But then everyone noticed the bones. Inside the spirals were the bones of small rodents. And even during the Cretaceous period, plants didn't drag rodents inside themselves. In 1993, two scientists independently came to the same conclusion. These were burrows, ancient burrows that filled with sand and fossilized. Barber didn't give up and said that the shape was too perfect for the home of some animal, that no creature digs so perfectly. In the end, the argument was settled by scratches on the inner walls, claw marks that someone left when the ground was still soft and wet. In 1905, the culprit was identified. It turned out to be Paleocastor, an ancient beaver about the size of a marmot who lived here 20 million years ago, with short tails, small ears, and incredibly long front teeth that grew quickly so they wouldn't wear down from constant digging. This small animal braced its hind legs on the axis and screwed itself into the ground, creating the perfect spiral. At a depth of about a meter, the burrow widened into side chambers for sleeping and raising the young. Sometimes there were separate recesses, which scientists believe were used as toilets or water containers. The spiral entrance protected against predators. Sticking a paw into a straight burrow is easy, but much harder with a spiral one. Paleocastors disappeared when the climate on the planet became dry and hot and forests gave way to endless plains. But their burrows still stick out of the hills in a national park in Nebraska, 22 million years later, with a shape so perfect that a world-renowned geologist couldn't figure out what it was for 40 years. Strange scratches on the rocks. The Swedish island of Gotland is located in the Baltic Sea. And if you move away from the tourist spots and look carefully at your feet, you start to notice something strange. There are deep scratches on the rocks, long, straight, clearly made by someone's hand. And not just one or two, but thousands of such marks all over the island, on boulders, on cliffs, on separate stone blocks. Moreover, in some places there are literally dozens of them on a single rock, while nearby there isn't a single one. When people started talking seriously about this in the 19th century, the first thing that came to mind was that weapons were sharpened here. The Baltic Islands were a center for trading swords and axes, and the marks on the stone seemed like a logical explanation. But it quickly turned out that the size and shape of these scratches just weren't suitable for sharpening. Not a single sword or axe from that era would even fit into these narrow grooves. And the strangest thing is that no work debris was ever found near these stones. No metal shavings, no blade fragments, nothing at all that would indicate anything was ever sharpened here. And then something interesting was discovered. The same kind of grooves can be found in Norway, Finland, and France. There, they are called polissoirs and are dated to the Neolithic period. The same culture that built dolmens and erected menhirs. Similar traces have been found in Australia and India. All over the world, similar marks are found in stone, and that in itself is already strange. Identical scratches created by people unaware of each other. Nowhere else in the world are there as many as on Gotland. Scientists have counted more than 3,600 such traces there. Some are right on the cliffs, others are on separate stones scattered all over the island. Scientists have suggested several theories. The first is astronomical. Many of the grooves are oriented toward the sun or the moon. Perhaps this was a way to track time and seasons. The second theory is ritual. The symbolic markings are connected to fertility or death cults. And finally, the practical theory, polishing wooden poles or bone tools, the traces of which simply have not survived. None of the theories explain why people on different continents who could not have known about each other created the same shapes. Why are there dozens of grooves in some places but none nearby? And why go to such effort on hard limestone? 3,600 grooves on one island, and there is still no answer. What do you think it is? Write your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear your theories. Wars of the Warrior Children. In the south of Italy, in the municipality of Ponte Cagnano Faiano, builders started digging a foundation pit at a former tobacco factory and called in archaeologists. They arrived and discovered 34 tombs from the 4th to 3rd centuries BC. These were left by the Samnites, an ancient Italian people who fought Rome for several centuries and were eventually absorbed by it. Samnite tombs themselves are regularly found in the area, so there was nothing sensational about that. But when they began to examine the contents, one detail kept bothering them. 15 out of the 34 tombs belong to children from newborns up to 10 years old, which is rare in itself. Children's burials are usually less well preserved, but that's not the main point. In several of the children's tombs, bronze belts were found, wide and well preserved. Among the Samnites, such belts were a symbol of an adult male warrior. They were worn as a sign of status and belonging to the warrior class. For a 5-year-old child, such a belt is not the right size, age, or meaning. So why is it in a child's grave? Scientists offer 2 explanations. The first one, the belt was a symbol of who this child was supposed to become. He died before his time, but his parents buried him as a warrior, as if they gave him in death what he didn't have time to receive in life. The second explanation is even more interesting. It's possible that the Samnites had a custom of initiating children as warriors from a very early age, long before a child could even hold a weapon. Something like an oath from the cradle. Neither version has been proven, but both say the same thing. These people saw childhood very differently than we do. In men's tombs, there are spear and javelin tips. In women's, there are rings and jewelry. All the burials are arranged in family groups next to each other. 34 tombs, and in half of them there are children with adult warrior belts on their small bones. A whole city at the bottom of the lake. In Kyrgyzstan lies the mountain lake Issyk-Kul, one of the largest in the world, almost 200 kilometers long, surrounded by the ridges of the Tian Shan. It doesn't freeze even in winter because of its salinity and depth. In 2023 and 2024, a group of divers and investigators explored the underwater area near the shore. And what they described in the expedition report sounds like the plot of an adventure movie. At the bottom of the lake, there are streets, brick buildings, and furnace complexes. Under a layer of loose sand, there is a well-preserved cultural layer. It is literally permeated with traces of human activity, shards of pottery, animal bones, and slag from metal smelting. Next to the buildings, they discovered a Muslim necropolis from the 13th to 14th centuries. The cemetery measures 300 by 200 meters. It is neat and well preserved. People lived here, traded, and buried their dead. Then the water came and covered the entire city. The Tian Shan region is seismically active, and geologists link the flooding to a major earthquake in the 15th century. The shore subsided, the water level rose, and the city disappeared. Apparently, there were few casualties. People managed to leave in time. After that, the shores of Issyk-Kul continued to be used by nomadic tribes. Small villages still stand here to this day. But here's what's important. For centuries, trade routes of the Silk Road passed around this lake. The main route went from the Chui Valley through the Bedel Pass into China. And Issyk-Kul was not just a lake. It was a crossroads where merchants from dozens of countries met. Silks, spices, metals, and ideas flowed through here. And now, this trading post on one of the main routes of the medieval world lies several meters underwater, along with its streets, ovens, and cemetery. Underwater excavations have only just begun, and researchers say that the well-preserved cultural layer promises many more discoveries. No one knows exactly what else lies there yet. 460 years at the bottom of the Baltic. In 1563, Swedish King Erik XIV built a ship that was supposed to change the balance of power in the Baltic Sea. Mars, 48 meters long, 1,800 tons, 107 cannons on board. One of the first 3-masted giants in Europe. The flagship of the fleet, which even enemies were afraid to see on the horizon. The Danes and the Germans understood that in open battle with such a ship, they had no chance. On May 30, 1564, Mars engaged in battle with the Danish-German fleet. The first day belonged to the Swedes. Their artillery literally swept everything in its path. But on the second day, the weather turned bad. The Swedish squadron scattered, and the huge Mars was left alone against an entire squadron. The German ships chose a smart tactic. They stayed out of the gun's range. Instead, they began bombarding the flagship's deck with incendiary projectiles, a mixture of sulfur, resin, and saltpeter. While the Swedes were putting out the fire, about 300 men from Lübeck in Denmark boarded the ship. And in the heat of the hand-to-hand fight, the fire reached the powder magazine. The explosion was so powerful that the bow of the ship was found 40 meters from the main hull. Along with Mars, 700 to 800 Swedes and several hundred Germans went down to the bottom. The ship that was supposed to change the history of the Baltic served exactly 1 day in battle. The ship lay at the bottom of the Baltic for more than 460 years, and it was preserved in amazingly good condition: cold, brackish water, weak currents. And most importantly, there are no shipworms in the Baltic Sea, which destroy wooden hulls in other seas. Scientists found deformed bronze cannons there, damaged by the explosion, incendiary grenades, boarding hooks that had only been seen before in old paintings, and bones with saber marks. The Baltic Sea preserved not just a ship, but a complete picture of a 16th century naval battle, with all the details that history usually does not preserve. Eggs of 3 types of creatures. In the Brazilian state of São Paulo, a very interesting place was discovered back in 2004, but serious excavations only began in 2021. And here is what they found there. 3 clutches of eggs, aged from 66 to 105 million years, that is, from the time of the dinosaurs. The first clutch had 15 eggs, the second had 21, and the third had 47 eggs in a single clutch. Nothing like this has ever been found anywhere in the world in the entire history of paleontology. The eggs belong to crocodile-like crocodilomorphs, an ancient group of reptiles that includes the ancestors of modern crocodiles. They have an ellipsoid shape and blunt ends. The shell thickness ranges from 0.3 to 0.8 millimeters. The high porosity indicates that the eggs developed in a humid, swampy environment. But the most interesting thing is not the eggs themselves, but the location. All 3 clutches are found in the same geological layer. This means they were laid at the same time, and they are arranged in a way that indicates colonial nesting. Next to the crocodilomorph clutches, paleontologists found traces of nests belonging to predatory theropod dinosaurs and ancient birds. Different species of reptiles nested here at the same time. Imagine a swamp 100 million years ago. In one place, literally just a few meters apart, crocodilian reptiles, predatory dinosaurs, and the first birds are laying eggs at the same time. Completely different creatures that, in another situation, would simply eat each other. But here, each one is busy with its own nest and doesn't bother its neighbor. Scientists still don't understand why this particular place attracted them all together. Maybe it's the special temperature of the soil. Maybe it's something else. But the fact is, this was something like a common maternity ward for several species at once. And this place lay untouched in the ground for 100 million years until they finally began to excavate it. An unknown god of ancient Egypt. Here's a name you probably haven't heard before: Pelusium, an ancient Egyptian city on the eastern border of the Nile Delta, the first line of defense for Egypt against eastern invasions, and at the same time a major port city through which everyone passed: Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. Whoever controlled Pelusium controlled the entrance to Egypt. Today this place is called Tel El Farama, and Egyptian archaeologists have been excavating here for 6 years. Recently they found a round temple there with a huge pool in the center, 35 meters in diameter. That's about half the size of a football field. The pool was connected by a canal to one of the branches of the Nile, and the water came there on its own, murky and rich in silt. A network of canals and reservoirs surrounded the pool to control water flow. And right in the center stood a square platform, on which most likely there was a large statue of a deity. To whom was this temple dedicated? To a god named Pelusi, so little known that most historians have never heard of him. His name supposedly comes from the Greek word pelos, meaning mud, clay, or silt. That is, he is the god of Nile silt, a symbol of fertility and renewal. Every year the Nile would flood and leave a layer of fertile silt on its banks, without which Egypt simply could not have survived. And they built a round temple with a living pool for this god, which breathed together with the river. The architecture of the temple shows traces of several cultures at once: Egyptian layout, Greek proportions, Roman details, all of which is quite expected for a city at the crossroads of civilization. The temple was used from the 2nd century BC to the 6th century AD, almost 800 years surviving the transition from the Ptolemies to Rome and from Rome to Byzantium. They found it using a satellite and special equipment that scans the ground like an X-ray and shows what's inside without digging. The scan revealed a large building several meters underground. Then they made a small test excavation and saw brick walls, amulets with images of Egyptian gods, and a scarab with the name of Pharaoh Thutmose III, who lived 1,000 years before this temple was built, but was revered as a saint for a very long time after his death. For almost 800 years, this basin was filled with water from the Nile. People came here to pray, brought amulets to wear, and then everything was covered with sand and lay buried for another 1,500 years until a satellite looked down from above. New discoveries in Egypt. Since we're in Egypt, here's another story. And it's important not so much because of what was found, but because of how it was found. Buto, or Tel El Farin, the Hill of the Pharaohs, is in the northern Nile Delta. It's a place with a 6,000-year history. This was one of the main religious centers of pre-dynastic Egypt. Here, they worshiped the cobra goddess Wadjet, the patroness of Lower Egypt. That very cobra which the pharaoh wore on his crown. The problem with Buto is that it's almost impossible to excavate this place using conventional methods. Over 6,000 years, new buildings were constructed on top of the old ones. This created a layered cake of cultural deposits, saturated with groundwater. And sticking a shovel in means you don't know which layer you'll hit or what you might destroy. Egyptian scientists decided not to dig blindly, but first to see what's actually there. They use satellites and special equipment that scans the ground like an X-ray and shows hidden objects without disturbing the soil. The image turned out to be clear. At a depth of several meters, there is a building about 25 by 25 meters in size. Then they made a small test excavation in one specific spot and saw exactly what they expected: brick walls, amulets, and ritual objects. Based on the finds, the building was dated to around the 7th century BC. The key point isn't the discovery itself, but that it's now possible to map everything under Buto without digging. We don't dig and look, we look first and then decide where to dig. And this changes everything, because under the Nile Delta there are thousands of such places, most of which are being destroyed right now by rising groundwater and construction. Dogs as family members. Peru, northern coast, the settlement of Castillo de Warmay, one of the centers of the Wari Empire, which existed from around 600 to 1050 AD, several centuries before the Incas. Scientists studied the burials here, and among the human bones, they found animal bones, 341 bones. At least 20 individuals of different ages, from puppies to adult animals. There are no signs of butchering here. These dogs were not eaten. They were buried. Among the bones, they identified 3 individuals with a congenital absence of premolars, a trait in modern Peruvian hairless dogs that is associated with a genetic mutation responsible for both the lack of premolars and hairlessness. Based on this trait, scientists concluded that these were indeed Peruvian hairless dogs, the very breed that tourists now photograph in Lima. Before this discovery, the only evidence of the breed's existence in the Wari Empire was a ceramic vessel depicting a hairless dog. But the most interesting part is something else. Isotope analysis of the bones showed that, as puppies, these 3 dogs were fed the same way as children from noble Wari families, the same chemical composition, the same foods. They were literally fed like children from noble families. And when the owner died, the dog would go with him. In one burial, a dog's paw had been amputated while it was still alive. Scientists believed that this was part of a ritual, preparing the animal for the role of tomb guardian. Another dog was buried next to a teenager, and a third one was buried next to a craftsman, whose grave contained all of his working tools. For the people of Wari, a dog was a member of the family in the most literal sense. It ate at the same table as its owner, lived nearby throughout its life, and accompanied its owner after death. And we know all this thanks to the bones from a 1,000-year-old grave. Before this discovery, no one could have even guessed that this breed of dog existed at that time. He forgot where he hid the coins. In 1988, American engineer and oceanographer Tommy Thompson did what every treasure hunter in the world dreams of. He found a sunken ship with gold. The steamship SS Central America sank in 1857 during a hurricane off the coast of South Carolina. On board were tons of gold, mined in California during the gold rush and sent to the eastern part of the country. The total value of the cargo today is estimated at about $500 million, Thompson developed a deep-sea robot specifically for this search. He found the wreck site at a depth of more than 2 kilometers, recovered most of the treasure, and in 2000 sold a batch of gold for $52 million. And then it turned out that 161 investors who had invested more than $22 million in the project did not receive a single cent, and that 500 of the rarest gold coins, which collectors value at tens of millions of dollars, disappeared from the inventory. Because gold from a 19th century sunken ship is not just gold, it's history and rarity, for which people pay dozens of times more than the metal's value at auction. In 2012, when the case was heading to court, Thompson disappeared. They searched for him for 3 years and found him in a Florida hotel. To every question about the coin's fate, he replied he didn't remember. He said he registered them in someone else's name in Belize and lost track of them long ago due to memory issues. The court applied a rare measure. He was imprisoned not for a crime, but for refusing to answer a question. With no specific term and no release date, you just sit there until you talk. Thompson spent 10 years in jail, paying a $1,000 fine every day. His health kept getting worse, but he continued to remain silent. In March 2026, he was released for medical reasons because it was no longer possible to keep the old man in prison. He is 74 years old, and the 500 coins were never found. And apparently from the very beginning, he decided that 10 years of silence was better than any other option. And it seems he was right. DNA of living beings from space. Where did life come from? A question that humanity has been searching for an answer to ever since it learned how to ask questions. In 2020, the Japanese probe, Hayabusa 2 returned to Earth with soil samples from the asteroid Ryugu, a small capsule with a few grams of material and several years of analysis. The results were announced recently, and they turned out to be unexpected, even for the scientists who were waiting for them. In the samples from Ryugu, they found exactly the molecules that make up the genetic code of any living creature on Earth. Everything needed to record and transmit information about life. Not something similar, not random organic substances, but exactly the same building blocks that make up any living cell, plus ammonia, which is also considered one of the key substances for the origin of life. Ryugu is not the only such asteroid. American scientists studied another asteroid, Bennu, and found the same thing there. This suggests that such molecules form in space on their own, in absolute cold and vacuum, without any of the conditions we consider necessary for life. 4 billion years ago, asteroids were constantly falling on the young Earth, and among them, there were surely some just like Ryugu. It's possible that life on our planet didn't originate here from scratch, but arrived ready-made, like a set of parts that just needed to be assembled under the right conditions. No one is saying that life exists everywhere in the universe. That hasn't been proven. But the molecules that make up each of us are now traveling through space inside thousands of asteroids, somewhere in the darkness between the planets. And what do you think about the theory that we are guests on Earth and came here from other planets? Write your thoughts in the comments. Man-made caves underground. England, Shropshire, Cainton Hall Estate. If you walk across the field and look carefully under your feet, you can notice a small hole in the ground, about the size of a rabbit hole. But this burrow leads down into a large underground hall, then into the next one, and then into an entire system of man-made rooms carved into the red sandstone with arched ceilings, niches, and columns. Officially, the Cainton Caves date to the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Someone put in an incredible amount of effort to carve out these halls. The exact purpose is unknown, maybe for storage, maybe as a place of seclusion. But local lore has long connected this place with the Templars, a Catholic military order founded in the 12th century, which in 200 years became the wealthiest organization of the medieval world. In 1307, the French King Philip IV arrested the order's leadership. Torture and executions began. The order was disbanded. And to this day, no one knows what happened to the Templar treasures. The shape of the halls really does resemble Romanesque chapels. Low arches, a certain symmetry, niches where statues could have stood. In 2012, the entrance was sealed off because of vandals and people who used the underground halls for occult rituals. Traces of candles and devilish symbols were found on the walls here. In 2017, a photographer published pictures of these halls from the inside, and the caves instantly spread all over the internet. Most likely, it's just a beautiful place that was built in the 19th century by some wealthy landowner with a vivid imagination. There were never any Templars there. But here's what's interesting. Even if you remove all the legends, the question remains. Someone put in a huge amount of effort to carve several neat halls with arches and niches into the rock. Why here? Why like this? And why at all? No one really knows to this day. Crystal figures from Peru? And here is the last story, but let me warn you right away. There's no mainstream science behind this. There are no academic articles. There are no verified sources either. Everything you're about to hear are stories told by people who claim they were there and saw everything. I'm telling you this honestly. Take this not as a fact, but as a story that can't simply be ignored. In the highland regions of Peru, there are caves in the rocks that are hard to reach. According to people who supposedly made it there, in one of the rock chambers, there are figures about 3 meters tall made of transparent rock crystal, pure quartz, with a strength that's almost impossible to find in nature in such large amounts. Inside each figure, you can see thin channels and structures that look like something alive, as if there are vessels or nerves running inside the stone, and devices placed near these figures supposedly pick up some kind of rhythmic signal coming from within. The locals call this place the Hall of Sleeping Guides and avoid it. They say if you touch it, some kind of balance will be disturbed. Those who came there with various equipment talk about electronics malfunctioning and strange behavior of the devices. And during the full moon, they say, such a low hum appears in the cave that you feel it not with your ears, but with your whole body. And all communication cuts out within a radius of several kilometers. After that, they stopped letting people in. The military closed off access. None of this has been confirmed. It's quite possible that this is just a story passed down by word of mouth, and each time it gains new details. Mountainous Peru is a hard-to-reach place. Legends are easily born there. But here's something to think about. Every year they find something that seemed impossible just yesterday. Flooded cities, temples of unknown gods, traces of people where no one expected to find them. The crystal figures are most likely a legend. But the line between legend and discovery is sometimes thinner than it seems. I wonder, what do all these stories have in common? Thompson hid the gold on purpose, and he took the secret with him to prison for 10 years. The ship sank on the very first day of battle and lay there for 400 years. An entire city went underwater in one night after an earthquake. Ancient beavers built perfect spirals 22 million years ago, and no one suspected it. And no one knew about it until the 19th century. Somewhere a person hides something, somewhere loses it, and somewhere just forgets. And time decides on its own whether it will be found or not. And judging by what we find every year, time is still on our side. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because a new video is coming soon.